I would like to welcome you to this wonderful and rather unusual conference.
In an open and impartial atmosphere.
Now it's starting now.
The subterranean water supply system of the city of David display in their plans and spatial layouts numerous apparent design anomalies which defy optimal rational planning. These anomalies have intrigued scholars ever since the waterworks have been discovered some 150 years ago. Several attempts have been made to resolve these puzzles under the assumption that the waterworks were man-made according to a deliberate human design. These, however, attempts offer absolutely untenable explanation to the outstanding questions. I believe, and I hope that I will convince the audience, that the explanation that I have in mind is the correct one. We'll start with some site orientation, which by now has been already reviewed in the previous slides. In this topographic map of Jerusalem that shows the location of the Canaanite and Israelite cities, the only perennial water source in the area is the Gihon spring, right here, which issues outside the confines of the city walls. The Canaanite city, shown here at the top, was built on a narrow spur that slopes southward of the Temple Mount. The Canaanites fortified the spring with a massive tower. We have already heard about this, some discussion this morning. And the way to it was protected by a fortified passage. This is the tower, and this is the fortified passage. During the Israelite period, the city expanded to the north and to the west. This is a view of the city which Ronnie has already shown. The Gihon spring, located about here. This rectangular plot is actually the place of the old Siloam pool. In order to bring the spring's water safely into the city, the ancient inhabitants constructed two major underground water supply systems. The one built by the Canaanites is known as the Warren Shaft installation. The one built by the Israelites is the famous Hezekiah Tunnel. The Warren Shaft installation is located on the northern part of the city of David, and this is the trajectory of the famous Hezekiah Tunnel. Next, I would like to briefly review the plans and spatial layouts of the two waterworks that I have mentioned to you. This is a cutout drawing of the Warren Shaft system. The installation creates a connection from the top of the city via the vertical Warren Shaft all the way down to the level of the Gihon spring. In the lower level, an additional tunnel connected the bottom of Warren Shaft to the spring. Another vertical shaft that does not have any function, known as the dead-end shaft, is encountered along the way. Also shown is the north trajectory of the Hezekiah Tunnel. Let me repeat this. This is the dead-end shaft. The whole system creates a tunnel from the top of the city to Warren Shaft, down the Warren Shaft, and then another tunnel that leads all the way to the Gihon spring. The northern trajectory of the Hezekiah Tunnel is whatever left to be shown here. The tunnel goes all the way down to the southern end. This plan portrays more accurately the courses and dimensions of the different objects in the system. Note the steepness of the tunnel, its curved course, which unnecessarily prolongs the distance of to the head of the shaft by some 40 meters, and the presence of caves at the far end. I'm talking about this very steep incline, the ledge that is at the bottom of it, the dead-end shaft, and the caves at the further north. The course of the tunnel is curved. The distance here is by 40 meters shorter than the axial one. This map shows the system of tunnels present at the level of the Gijon Spring, drawn and labeled by Vincent in 1911. His numbers are in use ever since. Note that already Vincent noted the presence of 3 caves in the system. Here is an estuary cave, another one here, another one here, and these channels we will discuss all along the presentation, and it's a good time for you to be familiar with the numbers because we're going to use them all along. This is called channel 1, and it's not of any concern to the present talk. This is known as channel 2, and it's actually the Siloam channel, to be differentiated from the Siloam tunnel. This is channel 3. This is the round chamber. From the round chamber we have channel 4 leading all the way to channel 6. Channel 5 is this one, and it is important to note that it is not at the same level as the other channels. It is slanted upwards at some degree, and we'll say something about it later. And as we go further to the west, we have channel 7, which didn't have any purpose. Vincent labeled the Hezekiah tunnel as channel 8. This is a cutout which shows more completely the course of the Hezekiah tunnel all the way in the underground. First, we have here the worn shaft system, which we already reviewed. The tunnel is winding its way all the way under the city, is ending at the Siloam pool. This is a more accurate map of the Hezekiah tunnel, or if you're not convinced that it was built by Hezekiah, some people will call it the Hezekiah, the Siloam tunnel. You see that it's winding. The distance from the spring to its southern end here, not here, is 345 meters, whereas its actual length is 533 meters. Another remarkable feature which has some bearing on understanding how this system was built is the fact that at the southern end, at this point, the level of the floor of the tunnel is a mere 32 centimeters lower than the level of the Gijon. Now, had it been done by a human design, it would have been an unbelievable feat to create such a low gradient, which amounts to 0.6 per mil. This is really beyond any reasonable engineering accomplishment, to have such a low gradient for such a long course. So this will play some role in what we have to say later. Now, what I've shown so far raises immediately several questions. First of all, there is not a straight segment in the pathway in the entire system. All the waterways are much longer than the straight line that passes from its endpoints. Very steep, hard to negotiate slopes abound, and there are installations whose function is not clear. With this in mind, clearly, the routes and spatial layouts of the waterworks defy optimal rational planning. As I've mentioned already in the introduction, this has puzzled researchers ever since they were discovered. All the attempts that have been made to account for these anomalies, in my opinion, as we say, do not hold water. They are really untenable and they cannot be defended. Thus, the objective of the present study was twofold, actually. One was to offer a plausible, comprehensive explanation to all the apparent anomalies in the system, and second, it was to reconstruct their building history. At this point in the discussion, it is important to be cognizant of the well-known fact that potent geological karstic dissolution processes have affected the carbonate terrain in Israel throughout the Neogene period. During this period, widespread, extensive, and diverse cavernous systems were created all over the mountainous region of the country, including the Jerusalem area as well. It is thus not surprising at all that they also be ubiquitous in the subsurface of the city of David. Here, the Karst system and its specific features include the following. First of all, small isolated caves. Secondly, a siphon-type karstic spring, horizontal and inclined dissolution conduits, vertical dissolution shafts, we already saw two of them, and abundant dissolution cavities. Now, representative occurrences of these are displayed in the following slides. Let's start with the dead-end shaft. The dead-end shaft is blocked today by debris and sand, and it cannot be visited. However, Vincent, in the Parker expedition, described it in detail, and this is a drawing of what he produced. When you look at it and read it carefully, this is paved by carbonate crust all along the way. There are no signs of any Ewing along its way, and it's obvious that this is a natural karstic shaft. As we go down the worn shaft system, these are the things that we encounter along the way. You see the caves in the northern end. Here's another one. You see the crumbling. There are actually, I don't have time to discuss it, but there are two geological formations along the tunnel. This is a massive, very dense dolomite, and this is a very porous and crumbling limestone. And much of the karstic features have been concentrated along the boundary between those two lines. Now we come to the worn shaft itself. This is clearly a karstic feature, and there cannot be any doubt about it. First of all, you go along it, there are no signs of Ewing anywhere along the shaft. Also, it is paved with the carbonate crusts, and moreover, at one time, just to convince people that weren't fluent with the morphology of karstic features, I sampled the crusts and analyzed them for carbon-14. You know, carbon-14 can date all sorts of features, but as it were, carbon-14 is limited to about 40 to 45,000 years. That means if you don't find any carbon-14 in the crust, it must be older than 45,000 years. If it's older than 45,000 years, it's certainly not man-made. So there's absolutely no question that that worn shaft is a natural feature, and I won't go into it, but at one time it constituted a whole argument. Did the Canaanites dig it, or did the Israelites dig it? This is really superfluous. It is a natural thing, and that's a fact. Now, I want to emphasize here something which might be not very significant to you, but which I consider as one of the, what I call, smoking guns in the whole system. Observe this, how the channel that comes into worn shaft is, what is the profile, the smooth profile of this channel as it comes into worn shaft. There is no sign of any digging or hewing in here, and this is exactly how a horizontal conduit in a karst system is pouring sort of into the vertical shaft. This absolutely proves the following thing. it proves that the floor of the tunnel that leads to the worn shaft today is originally a floor of a conduit that led water into the shaft. Moreover, you have to be aware of the fact that shafts don't just form out of the blue. Shafts need some input of karstic, acidic water in order to dissolve them. And without this conduit that produced some water, created all the dissolution, you couldn't get the shaft. So be aware of the fact that this very little feature here closes a corner for us, saying that the system that fed worn shaft in the first place was an original one. Now let's review some of the Karst features in the Hezekiah tunnel. We already reviewed the one in the upper floor of the worn shaft system. Now we're going down to the ones in the Hezekiah tunnel. We start with the cave in which the Gihon spring issues. This is clearly a very, very nicely carved natural cave, and actually the point of outflow of the Gihon spring is in here. Now the Gihon spring itself is what's called a siphon type karstic spring. I'm not going to dwell on the mechanism by which this is operating, but basically you have a chamber inside the rock which is fed by all sorts of karstic dissolution conduits from above or from below or from a distance. This chamber is being filled with water, and there is a pipe, a siphon type pipe that drains it. As soon as the water reaches this level, they are sucked out, and the whole reservoir becomes empty, and the water gushes out of this outlet. This is present only in karstic terrains. You wouldn't find it anywhere else. So this is another very, very solid piece of proof that we have a lot of karst in the system. Now I'm going to review a few of the other ones. There is a small karstic shaft right next to the Gihon spring. There is another shaft about 140 meters from the southern end of the tunnel. It is today blocked by some rocks. However, in 1882, when Charles Condor first discovered it, it was still open to the air. So this is certainly another vertical shaft to the open. Now this is a very unique feature which I'll spend a minute or so to describe, because it's another very important smoking gun, so to speak, to tell us how the system was formed. As you go along the tunnel, you will see dissolution cavities like this one and this one, but as you go along the tunnel, these are present only on one side. In other words, this cavity does not cross the tunnel and continue on the other wall. This seemingly is not very significant. However, you have to appreciate that originally this cavity and this cavity were draining into a conduit, and therefore they never reached the other wall. This is another proof that basically we had a conduit which is today the Hezekiah tunnel. Now, with these all figures in mind, I can propose briefly a geologic evolution model for the evolution of the Karst system in the city of David. I already mentioned the fact that we have two very distinct strata, and all this system actually developed in a response to the level of the bottom drainage system that existed. In the first stage, the Kidron Valley was still not incised, and a water table, actually what we call here a perch aquifer, developed along the contact in a very, very straight line, actually mimicking the contact between the two, the two strata. At this point, these are the features which were formed. The dead-end shaft started to form. This is why this steep incline was created, because it's a natural one. And this is why we have a very, very straight tunnel along the top of these two units. Along the way, channel 4, caves 5 and 6 were also formed. Now, as the Gijon started to incise topographically, the base level of the drainage system started to drop. The upper tier was abandoned and became dry, and the system started to find and hew and dissolve its way all the way down to a new level. This new level was determined by the base level of drainage at the time that I'm talking about. Now, as it were, and we already saw by this indication that this is a natural conduit and this is a natural shaft, this is the profile of what we actually see in the subsurface of the city of David as the primordial, as the pre-existing system of Karst conduits before the place was inhabited. Note, please, along this argument that this tunnel here actually continued all the way down to the Tyropaeon Valley, and this is a conduit along which eventually Hezekiah tunnel was dug. So once this is understood and confirmed as the basic pre-existing Karst system in the whole site, now we can start to understand how these water systems were created. And we'll start with the worn shaft system. Please take note on the following. I have just shown you that this is the primordial underground system that existed at the time. Now, what do you do if you want to create a system that leads to the worn shaft and eventually to the spring? You have to remove this overhead right here. And this is what is shown here. This overhead was removed in order to get closer to the shaft. This conduit could have been 30 meters high or 40 meters high, but certainly not enough for a person to go through it. So you had to remove its top and get to the top of the shaft. However, at the top of the shaft, you're still in a position where you cannot hang a ring here and draw water from below. You have to create an opening here in order to facilitate it. This is exactly what I show here. After this point, they have excavated a niche above it in order to be able to draw water. And this is another very significant observation. This is how this niche looks. Let me assure you that this is the only part of one shaft which is hewn. All the rest of the shaft, all the rest of the shaft, all the rest of the shaft is natural. This is the only part of it that was dug by men. So this really presents a very convincing, in my opinion, model of how the worn shaft system was created. Of course, and I'm not going into all the details, but by the time they did this, there was already a tunnel that connected the bottom of the shaft with the spring. This eventually became known as channel number 6, and we'll return to this later. But here you have a complete system that facilitates the drawing of water from the spring. Now, with this in mind, I'll try now to show how the Karst model really accounts for all the anomalies that we observe in the system. Let's start with the tunnel sinuous path. Now, there's nothing unusual of sinuous passes in caves, so that is taken care of. Now, another question, of course, here is actually, and I'm referring to this as we go along, the location of the south exit is here. Why on earth did they choose this as the exit of the tunnel? Had this been man-made, they would have dug a tunnel from here to here, about 200 meters shorter. Why would they go to this particular place and start digging from there? Only the Karst system explains this. Moreover, we have the accurate 0.6 per mil gradient, and one has to ask, not only did they choose this point, they knew when they get there to start digging 32 centimeters below the level of the Gijon. That's unthinkable. The opening was there, water was gushing, particularly when the spring was gushing. There were always gushes that could indicate to the diggers that indeed this was a conduit that went all the way to the Gijon, and that's why they chose this point. Now, another thing is the uneven ceiling height, which is shown here again by Vincent. Again, you don't have to account for it in the natural caves. Natural caves and uneven ceiling all over the place. And another aspect is the absence of man-made shafts to the surface for ventilation and orientation. Now, they didn't have any underground orientation tools to guide them in the subsurface. Usually what's done in ancient tunnels, you dig vertical shafts and you orient yourself according to where the shafts are present in the surface. In our case, there isn't one. So obviously they didn't have any problem to orient themselves in the subsurface. Another thing, well, I don't have time. Maybe at the end I'll show you my solution to this thing of ostensible abnormal hairpin bends and false starts in the tunnel center. This refers to what's happening here near the meeting point. And again, about a kilometer and a half north of the Hezekiah Tunnel, we already built the terminal, the railway terminal of Jerusalem, known as the Yitzhak Navon station. This station in the underground is the termination of a natural karstic system that has been blocked, which looks exactly like the Hezekiah Tunnel. Now, another thing is this argument, which people haven't considered in detail, but I want to emphasize it. I call it explains the existence of an a priori assurance that the two teams working from opposite ends will indeed meet each other. It's unthinkable that Hezekiah or his people would embark on a project like this without this assurance. They would never know if the teams will meet, and so they had to have this present assurance before they ever started. So altogether, this scenario provides all the feasible and realistic solutions to the digging of the tunnel. Now, let me say a few words about dating consideration relevant to the waterworks. About Hezekiah Tunnel, the Bible attributes the construction of the tunnel to King Hezekiah in the 8th century BC. The date of is corroborated also by the Siloam inscription. So I'm marking this with a red asterisk because there have been some arguments to dispute the fact that it's very clear that Hezekiah is responsible for the digging of the tunnel, and I won't dwell any longer on this. Here is another thing that Ronnie has discussed this morning, the MB2 Canaanite construction of the fortified corridor in the spring tower. They are dated to MB2. Here's the fortified corridor. Here's the eastern wall of the Springs Tower. This is the spring tower. This is the corridor. no problem in dating these, and there have been some arguments about this, and we heard about this morning, but I won't dwell on it. A third thing is the age of the house built inside what I call the quarry. I won't dwell on this too long, but this rectangular area is about 10 meters, is a floor walled by 10-meter high walls, 10 meters below the surface around it. And in it, at this corner, a house dated to the 8th century BC has been documented by Ronnie and his team with the solid proof of the ceramics. And so there's no person. Basically, about the tunnel, the Canaanite construction, and the house, there are no real problems about dating the system. However, how can one date the hollowed out places of tunnels and channels? So far, there was no direct way to date those things which are actually the heart of the system. And for this purpose, I want to propose something which I call the Ewing typology as an archaeological dating tool, and it goes like this. Undoubtedly, Ewing cultures, I call it, evolved with time. Changes will have included the following main aspects and attributes. First of all, Ewing tools and chiseling tools. Another thing is the tunnel height and width. Just like what Ronnie described today about the MB2 culture of strong building stones versus the Israelite one, the same goes, how did they design tunnels? The third thing is aesthetics, the degree of concern for a neat finish expressed in the workmanship of the textures of the hewed wall. And a third one is actually the three-dimensional orientation and ventilation in the subsurface. These first three, the Ewing, the tunnel design, and aesthetics, are manifested in the subterranean waterworks of the city of David, and thereby facilitating the dating of the tunnels on the basis of how the hewed walls look. And I want to impress you with these two figures right here. There's a part of the system which looks like this. Let's not consider what it is. Just say as you go in the system, this is what you encounter. There's another part of the system which looks like this. These things are a world of difference. Naturally, you would say this is more primitive and this is more advanced. Now, in our context of the city of David, primitive to me is Canaanite, and modern to me is Israelite. And I propose to say that whenever you see such a texture or such a workmanship, you know that you are in an environment that was created by the Canaanites. And as soon as you arrive at this kind of an environment, you know that you're in a terrain excavated by the Israelites. I'll say more than that. You can go blindfolded in Dutch, just feel the walls, and immediately you will know in what kind of environment you are. Now, using this, here is what I can tell you about the age of the tunnels. Let me go one by one, again referring to the tunnels of Vincent as we go along. This is how Channel 6 looks. This is the entrance to the bottom of Warren Shaft. This is Channel 4. This is the tunnel that connects into the Warren Shaft at the upper tunnel. And this is the entrance of Channel 4 where it meets Channel 6. These are 1.30 meters high. They have rounded walls all along where we meet that 130 meter high tunnel. It's rough. It's not chiseled at all. It's only opened with pickaxes, and you know that you're in the primitive system. Now I will again make the connection between the primitive system and the fact that it is Canaanite. And I'll tell you that as soon as you encounter these kind of environments, you know that these were created by the Canaanites. How about the other one? Here is how the Israelite one looks. This, by the way, is the extension of Channel 2 to the Siloam Pool. It is claimed that this has been made by the Israelites, but there's no record of it. But when you look at the Ewing, at the texture of the wall, immediately you know that this is what I have already typologically described as an Israeli action. This is how the walls of the Hezekiah tunnel look, and this is the most interesting manifestation of everything that I say. This is Channel 6 today. Up till now, up till this height, 1.30 meters, it's the rough Canaanite digging with the rounded shoulders. Above it, we encounter the Israeli. And this is when Hezekiah tunnel was dug. It was enlarging the existing part of the Channel 6 Canaanite time. And here is the best proof that we are doing with 2 generations and 2 styles and 2 episodes of Ewing. Now, let me dwell a minute about the round chamber. I'm talking about this figure here, which is about 5 meters below the level of the what I call the floor of the quarry. It's connected to Channel 2 via what's called Channel 3, and it's eventually connected to Channel 4, which leads to Channel 6. Note one more thing, that this part of it, Channel 4, the Canaanite Channel 4, was terminated about in here, 2 meters short of the round chamber. I will show you that all this part, colored in black here, is significantly different in its Ewing than the rest of it. And once you understand that this is really an Israelite type project, you can understand why it was dug in the first place. In order to dig Hezekiah tunnel, they had to bypass the Gihon spring. They had to block the spring and be able to work in dryness and work all the way. Only after they completed the tunnel, they could open the water to flow and fill it up. So they had to have a route to bypass the spring. This is exactly the route to bypass the spring. You could enter it either from here or from the quarry. You had to dig Channel 3, you had to dig the round chamber, you had to dig this connection, and then you had a way to come around and bypass the spring, which is here, or come from the quarry, enter the round chamber, and go straight here. Another very, very important part of it is this chiseling at the entrance to the connection to Channel 4. This is undoubtedly a niche prepared for a commemorative plaque to commemorate the fact that this is actually the northern entrance into the tunnel. Now let me take you and convince you again that just by looking at the texture of the Ewing, you know where you are right. Oh, before that, at one time they had a psychedelic illumination of the round chamber. I don't know if it's still existing today, and it's quite spectacular. Note that this in particular emphasizes the shining of this plaque. Now, let's now take a tour, an excursion, to follow the footsteps of the diggers as they were bypassing the Gihon spring and getting into the tunnel. You start with Channel 2, which is Canaanite, and you go along this way. Now you have to take a right turn into the round chamber. This is Channel 3. There's absolutely no question that these are two generations of digging. This is the fine finish of the Israelite one, and this is the coarse one of the Canaanite one. So now you enter the round chamber, which is also very nicely chiseled, and now we have to connect to channel 4. This part did not exist at the time. Here is these 2 meters of this part. Again, Israeli chiseling. And only after 2 meters, you reach the channel 4, which takes you eventually to channel 6. This is where the two meet. Now, to summarize these all observations in just 2 maps, let me present to you how the Canaanite construction looked on a map. At the time of the Canaanites, all the water system that we have reviewed included the channel 2, included what the worn shaft allowed, and channel 6, which connected the bottom of the shaft to the spring. This is the quarry, and now I have arguments here with Ronnie and even Nachshon by calling this a quarry. Today it's not a quarry, but this is a hole in the ground. This is a square hole in the ground with 10-meter high walls. This is not natural. It had to be dug by men. So in the first place, at one time, it constituted a quarry. Not only this, I can assure you that the stones taken out of this quarry, which are the Mizi Ahmar dolomite, are the stones used to construct the spring tower and the fortified passage, corridor. And the closest place to bring those stones, which are 1 or 2 tons heavy, was the quarry that was right next to it. So today it's not a quarry. Today a house was built in the 8th century inside it, and the builders of this house did clear the walls and chisel it very nicely to what they are looking today. Now at the Canaanite time, there was a stairway leading from the upper part down into the bottom of the quarry. This part of it is still observable today. At the time, they had a landing here and turning left again into it. When the Israelites dug the round chamber, they had to destroy this part. And this is what you see today. There is a hanging stairway which never got into the round chamber. The round chamber is about 5 meters below it. And at the time, what we have for a system is the old worn shaft system. We had channel 2, channel 1 I'm not discussing, and Hezekiah Tunnel started actually not here, but at the end of channel 6, before it turns into the worn shaft. So these 2 maps are the ones that really represent what the landscape or what the construction constituted at the time. Now, I want to introduce you to a concept which, in my opinion, is very, very relevant to what I'm talking about. It's called the Occam's razor principle or theorem, and it is a general heuristic guideline for deciding among several competing explanations to give into a phenomenon or a problem. And now, this is very important. According to this principle, one should choose the simplest solution that involves the fewest hypotheses, concepts, assumptions, and law. The obvious 2 simple solutions to the City of David puzzle rest on 2 key insights: the recognition that the paramount role of natural karst conduits and shafts in shaping the subterranean work, and the second one, the realization that virtually distinct Ewing textures and workmanships constitute a typological instrument to establish the relative chronology of tunnels and channels. I'm not saying that the wall tells me that this is Canaanite. I'm not saying that the wall tells me that it is Israelite. I don't have a way to do the absolute dating, but I have a way to do the relative one. And in the context of the history of the place, I can associate the primitive one with the older one, namely the Canaanites, and the more modern one with the later one, namely the Israelites. Now, all this rhymes very nicely with what Leonardo da Vinci had to say about actually Occam's razor. First of all, he felt that the noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding, and this is a key statement. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Let me thank the organizer for having me the opportunity to participate, and thank you, the audience, for your attention. Thank you.